Hey there, night owls and history enthusiasts. Tonight we're taking a break from complex equations to explore something far more practical. The ingenious survival hacks our medieval ancestors developed that could literally mean the difference between life and death. Imagine for a moment you suddenly found yourself transported back to 14th century Europe. No electricity, no running water, no modern conveniences whatsoever. Before you get too comfortable in your cozy modern bed, why not show some love by hitting that like button if you enjoy these historical deep dives? And don't forget to subscribe if you want more content like this. I'd absolutely love to hear where in the world you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Drop me a comment below. It's always fascinating to see our global community of history buffs, preppers, and curious minds coming together, perhaps while secretly stockpiling beans and emergency supplies just in case. Now, let's set the mood properly. Dim those lights. Maybe turn on a fan for some soothing white noise in the background. Grab your favorite blanket and prepare to journey back with me to a time when survival wasn't guaranteed by technology, but earned through sheer ingenuity and hard-won wisdom. In the harsh reality of medieval Europe, fire wasn't just a convenience. It was the very foundation of survival. Think about it. Your primary source of heat during brutal winters, your only means of cooking food, your nighttime illumination, your protection against wild animals, and quite possibly your sole companion during those endless week-long storms when you were trapped in your drafty, leaky thatched hut. When medieval folks traveled, they didn't just pack some snacks and a change of clothes. They packed the very essence of survival itself: fire. Enter the incredibly clever portable fire bundle, essentially the medieval equivalent of a Zippo lighter. Though imagine if your modern lighter took forever to light, smelled suspiciously like a wet sheep, and came with the very real risk of accidentally setting your entire wooden cart ablaze if handled improperly. Not exactly what you'd call travel-sized convenience by today's standards. Let me walk you through exactly how these fascinating bundles worked. First, you'd carefully extract a glowing ember from your home hearth. Usually charcoal worked best, using special tongs. Then you'd wrap this precious heat source in layers of carefully prepared materials. Dried moss worked wonderfully, as did certain types of fungus, or specially treated punk wood that had been aged and dried to perfection. This combustible package would then be securely placed inside either a hollowed-out animal horn, sheep and cows being the most common sources, or a specially treated leather pouch that had been rendered fireproof through various medieval techniques. Some particularly advanced versions were even wrapped in linen that had been soaked in saltpeter, an early form of potassium nitrate, or rendered animal fat to dramatically extend the smoldering time. With proper care, this setup could keep a single ember alive and ready for use for hours on end. Some historical accounts suggest particularly well-made bundles could last a full day or more. Reviving it required some skill. You'd need to blow on it just right while gently coaxing the ember back to life. Not unlike trying to rebuild your shattered self-esteem after the village tax collector finished auditing your meager possessions and demanding his share. The entire system was remarkably lightweight considering its importance, completely reusable with proper maintenance, and absolutely vital to daily medieval life. Most importantly, it saved you from the absolute misery and frustration of spending what felt like half your day trying to strike sparks from flint and steel while desperately pretending to your family that you totally knew what you were doing. We've all been there with some modern technology, haven't we? Making fire from scratch was notoriously unreliable. A sudden gust of wind, slightly damp tinder, or fingers frozen stiff from winter cold could turn a routine task into an exercise in utter futility. Having a portable fire source meant you could confidently walk into a forest clearing after a long day's travel, quickly build a simple shelter, unpack your precious moss-wrapped miracle, and with a few well-timed puffs of breath accompanied by a quick prayer to Saint Smokey the Ember Keeper. Okay, I made that saint up, but you get the idea. Have a proper fire going in no time, ready for cooking a warm stew, providing life-saving heat, or even just entertaining the kids with dramatic shadow puppet shows to pass those interminably long winter nights. These fire bundles were so valuable, they often served as social currency too. You might generously give one to a neighbor heading to market, literally passing the torch of civilization, because nobody wanted to be that pathetic guy showing up at dusk begging strangers for fire. Talk about socially awkward. And you can bet they'd greet your desperation with sarcastic remarks like, "Should have packed your own moss, Gerald," or "Guess you'll be eating cold turnips tonight." Medieval folk could be surprisingly savage with their teasing. Now, was this ingenious system perfect? Did it solve all cooking problems? No, this wasn't some miraculous modern nonstick technology. It was pure medieval innovation at its finest, practical, clever, and born of necessity. But it did reduce food sticking enough to make cleaning those heavy iron pots somewhat easier and prevent your stew from developing that unappetizing crust that tastes like regret and charcoal. Let's dive deep into the fascinating world of medieval food preservation. Because when you're living in an era without refrigeration, keeping your food from spoiling isn't just about convenience. It's literally a matter of life and death. Picture this. It's the dead of winter in 14th century Europe. The harvest is long gone, the fields are frozen solid, and your family's survival depends entirely on what you manage to preserve during the abundant months. This was the harsh reality our ancestors faced, and their ingenious solutions will make you appreciate your modern refrigerator in ways you never imagined. Modern preppers might stock their pantries with vacuum-sealed meals, freeze-dried stroganoff, and enough canned beans to survive multiple apocalypses, while still complaining about the lack of variety. But medieval folks? They didn't have the luxury of expiration dates, temperature-controlled storage, or even basic food safety knowledge. Instead, they developed incredibly sophisticated preservation techniques using nothing more than smoke, salt, and the ever-present fear of starvation when February rolled around with its empty larders and growling stomachs. When we think of smoked meats today, we imagine backyard barbecues, artisanal smokehouses, and that perfect smoky flavor that makes your mouth water. But in the Middle Ages, smoking wasn't about creating gourmet experiences. It was about basic survival. This wasn't your gentle, aromatic applewood smoke. This was hardcore, strategic preservation smoke. Thick, pungent, and designed to keep you alive through the lean months. The kind of smoke that permeated every fiber of your home, your clothes, and probably your hair until you smelled like a walking campfire all winter long. The process was both simple and brilliant. In typical peasant homes with their open hearths, meat wasn't proudly displayed above the fire like some rustic decoration in a medieval-themed restaurant. No, it was carefully hidden behind the fire, tucked high up in the rafters where the heat and smoke could work their magic. This positioning was absolutely crucial. It's where the cooler smoke would linger, slowly and steadily working its way into every pore of the meat. The smoke didn't just coat the surface. It penetrated deep, creating an environment where bacteria couldn't survive and insects wouldn't dare venture. What's truly remarkable is how this process unfolded over time. In the first few days, the meat would begin to darken and firm up. After a week, it took on that characteristic smoky aroma. By the end of a month, it had transformed into something almost otherworldly, a food product that could literally last for years if properly maintained. We're talking about preservation so effective that archaeologists have found medieval smoked meats that were still technically edible after decades, though I wouldn't recommend trying it. The flavor profile of these medieval smoked goods would probably shock modern palates. Forget your delicate hickory smoked bacon or subtly flavored smoked salmon. This was smoke in its most primal form, intense, aggressive, and unapologetic. The wood used, often whatever was available, typically pine or other resinous woods, imparted a sharp, almost medicinal quality to the meat. Some historical accounts describe it as tasting like a forest fire, not exactly what we'd call gourmet today, but when your alternative is starvation, you learn to appreciate the robust flavors. But the real genius of this system was in its multiple layers of functionality. While the meat cured slowly in the rafters, the smoke served several other vital purposes. It acted as a natural insect repellent, keeping pests out of the home's food stores. It helped preserve other perishable items stored nearby. It even provided some additional insulation against the bitter cold of medieval winters. There's something oddly poetic about the idea that the same smoke preserving the family's food was also helping keep them warm through the long winter nights. Security was another crucial benefit. In villages where theft was as common as bad harvests, which is to say, very common, having your precious meat supply hidden in the rafters made it significantly harder for light-fingered neighbors to help themselves to your hard-earned provisions. The medieval equivalent of "I didn't see your sausage hanging there" must have been the most transparent excuse in history, but it was probably still better than having your winter food supply disappear overnight. Perhaps most importantly, this method of preservation created a sort of natural time-release food supply. Different meats would be smoked for different durations depending on when they'd be needed. Some might be lightly smoked for consumption in a few weeks, while others would undergo months of intense smoking for use deep into winter or even the following year. This allowed for careful planning and rationing, crucial skills when one bad harvest could mean the difference between survival and starvation. The psychological impact of this system shouldn't be underestimated either. Imagine looking up every day at those slowly curing meats, watching your winter sustenance take shape before your eyes. It was a constant, tangible reminder of both your preparedness and the challenges ahead. That dangling hem wasn't just food. It was hope made visible, a promise that you might just make it through to spring after all. So the next time you casually toss leftovers into your refrigerator without a second thought, take a moment to appreciate how far we've come. Our ancestors developed these remarkable preservation techniques not because they wanted to, but because they had to. Their entire existence was a delicate balancing act between preservation and putrefaction, between having enough and having nothing. In that context, that pungent, overwhelming smoke wasn't just a preservation method. It was the smell of survival itself. Now let's explore one of the most ingenious perimeter security systems ever devised. And no, we're not talking about moats or stone walls. Medieval folks developed something far more clever, sustainable, and frankly beautiful: the living fence. While today's preppers obsess over motion sensors, infrared cameras, and guard dogs that supposedly can smell looters from a mile away, our ancestors created defensive barriers that grew stronger with time and actually improved their environment. These weren't your typical wooden fences that rot, warp, and need constant maintenance. Living fences, or hedgerows as they were properly called, were masterpieces of ecological engineering. Picture this. Instead of spending back-breaking hours chopping trees and hammering together planks that would need replacing in a few years, medieval farmers simply planted fast-growing, flexible trees like willow, hawthorn, hazel, or blackthorn in tight, strategic rows. But they didn't just let them grow wild. Oh no, that would be too simple. The real magic happened in the training. As these young trees grew, farmers would carefully bend, weave, and interlace their branches into an increasingly dense, impenetrable wall of vegetation. This wasn't casual gardening. It was a form of arboreal architecture. Some techniques involved partially cutting the trunks, a process called laying, to encourage new growth while keeping the plant alive. Others incorporated viciously thorny species that served dual purposes: burglar deterrent and emergency berry supply, assuming you didn't mind getting pricked half to death while harvesting. The brilliance of these living fences can't be overstated. Unlike static defenses that deteriorate, a properly maintained hedgerow actually improved with age. Each growing season added thickness, density, and complexity to the barrier. Within just a few years, what started as a line of saplings became an organic fortress capable of stopping everything from marauding livestock to determined thieves. Some particularly well-crafted hedgerows were so dense that not even sunlight could penetrate, the medieval equivalent of a 10-foot concrete wall, but made entirely of living, breathing plants. But the benefits went far beyond simple security. These hedgerows were medieval multitaskers long before the term existed. They provided nesting sites for birds that helped control insect pests. Their flowers attracted pollinators that improved crop yields. Their roots stabilized soil and prevented erosion during heavy rains. In winter, they acted as windbreaks to protect delicate crops. During summer, they offered shade for workers in the fields. And let's not forget the practical bonus of having a ready supply of crafting materials. Flexible willow branches for baskets, straight hazel shoots for tools, and medicinal plants for home remedies. The social implications were fascinating too. A well-maintained hedgerow wasn't just practical, it was a status symbol. The quality of your living fence spoke volumes about your farming skills and dedication. Neighbors would compete to create the most impenetrable, productive boundaries. Some particularly ambitious landowners even shaped their hedgerows into decorative patterns or living mazes, the medieval equivalent of showing off your fancy security system to the neighbors. Perhaps most remarkably, many of these medieval hedgerows still exist today. Walking through the English countryside, you can find living fences that have been continuously growing for 700 years or more. Think about that. These biological barriers have outlasted empires, survived world wars, and witnessed technological revolutions that would have been unimaginable to their creators. They've seen the rise and fall of kings, the invention of gunpowder, the Industrial Revolution, and somehow they're still standing, or rather, growing strong. The contrast with modern security couldn't be more striking. Today we rely on electronic systems that become obsolete in years, require constant power, and stop working the moment the grid goes down. Medieval hedgerows needed no electricity, no software updates, and no maintenance contracts. They simply grew, adapted, and became more effective with each passing season. When properly designed, they were virtually immune to being bypassed. You couldn't cut through them without making tremendous noise. Those thorns had something to say about it. And digging under them was nearly impossible thanks to the dense root systems. There's something deeply poetic about this approach to security. Instead of fighting nature to create barriers, medieval farmers worked with it. They understood that the best defense isn't necessarily the strongest or most aggressive, but the one that harmonizes with its environment. Their living fences weren't just keeping threats out. They were actively improving the land they protected, creating habitats, preventing erosion, and even putting food on the table. So the next time you worry about your home security, consider this medieval wisdom. The best protection might not come from the latest technology, but from working with nature's own defenses. After all, when your security system can literally outlive civilizations, withstand centuries of change, and provide breakfast in the process, you know you've created something truly special. Let's talk about medieval climate control, because long before smart thermostats and central heating, our ancestors were masters of temperature regulation using one of the most humble materials on Earth, clay. When you hear clay battery, you might imagine some alchemical contraption zapping peasants with static electricity, but the truth is far more practical and surprisingly sophisticated. Medieval people discovered that clay, when used strategically, could maintain perfect storage temperatures year-round without a single watt of electricity. This wasn't some primitive stopgap. It was thermal physics perfected through centuries of trial and error. Clay's secret lies in its remarkable thermal mass, meaning it absorbs and releases heat at an incredibly steady rate. Picture an unglazed clay pot buried halfway in the ground on a hot summer day. The Earth's natural coolness combined with the clay's porous nature creates a perfect microenvironment where evaporation keeps contents chilled. Now imagine that same pot placed near a hearth in winter, slowly radiating stored warmth through the night. This was medieval temperature control at its finest, simple, effective, and completely off-grid. The applications were brilliantly varied. Dairy products like milk and butter could be kept fresh for days by placing them in water-soaked clay vessels, the evaporative cooling effect creating what we'd now recognize as a primitive refrigerator. Bury these pots in shaded cellar corners or stream banks, and you've got a reliable cold storage system that required no energy input beyond occasionally replenishing the water. During winter months, clay bricks heated by the fire and wrapped in wool became bed warmers that could maintain comfortable temperatures until dawn, the medieval equivalent of an electric blanket, just without the risk of electrocution. What's truly impressive is how these techniques were scaled. Wealthier households might have entire clay-lined storage rooms where the thermal mass of the walls maintained steady temperatures year-round. Travelers used small clay flasks to keep drinks cool or food warm during journeys. Some innovative cooks even developed clay slow cookers, pots that retained heat so well they could simmer stews for hours with just occasional attention. The military applications were equally clever, with clay being used to preserve medical supplies and even create portable heating units for field hospitals. The science behind this is fascinating. Clay's microstructure contains countless microscopic air pockets that slow heat transfer dramatically. When wet, the water in these pores evaporates gradually, pulling heat away from the container's contents. This same porosity allows clay to breathe, preventing moisture buildup that leads to spoilage. Medieval people may not have understood the physics, but they mastered the practical applications completely. Some particularly advanced systems used layered clay vessels with sand or straw insulation between them, essentially creating medieval thermoses that could keep liquids hot or cold for astonishing lengths of time. Food preservation wasn't the only benefit. Clay's thermal properties made it ideal for more comfortable living spaces too. Homes with clay tile floors stayed cooler in summer and warmer in winter. Thick clay oven walls retained baking heat efficiently, requiring less fuel. Even the sick benefited. Clay poultices could maintain precise therapeutic temperatures far longer than cloth alone. The material was so versatile that nearly every culture with access to clay developed some version of these thermal techniques, each adapted to their specific climate and needs. Perhaps most impressive is how these clay solutions addressed multiple problems simultaneously. A single cooling pot could preserve food, provide chilled drinks, and even help treat fevers. Heating stones could warm beds, dry clothes, and keep infants comfortable. The systems were self-regulating too. As ambient temperatures changed, the clay responded automatically, maintaining its equilibrium without any need for adjustment. This passive reliability made clay technology particularly valuable in an era when constant monitoring wasn't practical. The contrast with modern temperature control couldn't be starker. Where we rely on complex machinery requiring constant energy input and frequent maintenance, medieval clay solutions worked silently, continuously, and with virtually no failure points. They embodied the principle of appropriate technology, sophisticated solutions perfectly matched to their environment and resources. While we might chuckle at the simplicity, modern engineers are actually revisiting these ancient techniques for sustainable architecture, recognizing their unbeatable combination of efficiency and sustainability. So next time you adjust your smart thermostat, spare a thought for medieval thermal engineers and their clay batteries. Their solutions may have been low-tech, but the underlying science was brilliant, the execution elegant, and the results, as evidenced by how long these techniques remained in use, undeniably effective. In many parts of the world, these traditional methods are still used today, not as museum pieces but as practical, everyday solutions, a testament to just how well they really worked. Let's tackle one of the most frustrating kitchen problems that has plagued humanity since the dawn of cooking: food sticking to pans. If you've ever angrily scraped at eggs cemented to your nonstick skillet, you'll appreciate the medieval solution to this universal culinary woe. Forget Teflon and modern coatings. Our ancestors developed an ingenious, if labor-intensive, technique called friction glazing that turned ordinary clay pots into surprisingly effective nonstick cookware. This wasn't some primitive stopgap measure. It was a carefully perfected art form passed down through generations of potters. The process began with selecting the right clay, typically a coarse variety that would hold up to repeated heating and cooling. But here's where the magic happened. Before firing the pottery, artisans would spend hours painstakingly rubbing the still damp surfaces with smooth stones, bone tools, or hardwoods. This wasn't casual polishing. It was an intense, methodical compression of the clay's surface particles that could take half a day for a single pot. Imagine massaging a soup pot like it owed you money, and you get the idea. The physics behind this technique is fascinating. By compressing the surface, potters were essentially aligning the clay particles and sealing microscopic pores. This created what's known as a burnished glaze, not an actual glaze in the chemical sense, but a smooth, semi-resistant surface that significantly reduced food adhesion. Some particularly dedicated craftsmen would then apply thin layers of animal fat to the burnished surface before a final firing, creating a primitive form of seasoning not unlike what we do with cast iron today. The result? Cookware that, while not perfectly nonstick by modern standards, made the difference between easily cleaned pots and vessels where every meal left behind a concrete-like crust of burnt residue. Now, let's be clear, this wasn't a miracle solution. Medieval cooks still had to deal with some sticking, especially with delicate foods or sugary preparations. But compared to cooking on rough, unglazed surfaces, friction glazing was revolutionary. It meant stews could simmer without developing that dreaded burnt bottom layer. Flatbreads had a fighting chance of releasing intact, and cleaning required significantly less elbow grease and cursing. No small mercy in an era when elbow grease was often the only cleaning product available. The benefits extended beyond just cooking performance. Burnished pots were more water-resistant and less prone to cracking from thermal stress. They lasted longer in daily use, making the extra effort worthwhile. There was even an aesthetic component. Properly burnished pottery developed a subtle sheen that made it look more refined than its unfinished counterparts. In a world where most household items were strictly utilitarian, a beautifully burnished cooking pot was the medieval equivalent of kitchen bling, functional art that signaled the owner's good taste and willingness to invest in quality. The social implications of this technology are intriguing. While wealthier households might own metal cookware, friction-glazed pottery represented an affordable middle ground for common people. The technique spread across cultures and continents, with variations appearing everywhere from European peasant kitchens to African villages to Native American settlements. It was one of those rare technologies that crossed social boundaries. Both castle kitchens and roadside inns might use versions of the same basic principle, differing only in the level of craftsmanship. What's particularly impressive is how this ancient technology anticipated modern materials science. Today, we understand that reducing surface roughness at the microscopic level decreases adhesion, exactly what medieval potters achieved through their laborious polishing. Some contemporary ceramic cookware actually uses refined versions of these ancient techniques, proving that good ideas never really go out of style. There's even research into whether these traditional methods could inspire more sustainable alternatives to synthetic nonstick coatings. The contrast with modern solutions is striking, where we rely on complex chemical coatings that degrade over time and may release harmful compounds if overheated. Medieval friction glazing was completely non-toxic and actually improved with careful use. The trade-off, of course, was the tremendous amount of skilled labor required. While we can mass-produce Teflon pans by the millions, each burnished medieval pot represented hours of painstaking work by a craftsman who likely developed permanent shoulder problems from the repetitive motion. Perhaps the most remarkable thing about this technology is how long it persisted. Even as metal cookware became more common, friction-glazed pottery remained in use well into the industrial age in many regions. It was only when truly effective modern coatings emerged in the 20th century that these ancient techniques finally faded from widespread use, though they're still practiced by traditional potters and historical reenactors today. So next time you effortlessly flip a pancake in your nonstick pan, take a moment to appreciate the centuries of culinary frustration and innovation that led to this convenience. Our medieval ancestors may not have had space-age materials, but their solution to the sticky pan problem was ingenious, effective, and grounded in a deep understanding of their materials. It's a reminder that sometimes the most elegant solutions don't come from high-tech labs, but from generations of craftsmen patiently perfecting their art, one painstakingly polished pot at a time. Let's explore one of the most overlooked survival skills in medieval Europe: sound navigation. In an era before GPS, digital maps, or even reliable road signs, travelers developed incredibly sophisticated methods of wayfinding using nothing but their ears. This wasn't some primitive backup system. It was a finely tuned sensory art that could mean the difference between reaching safety and wandering lost in endless forests where a wrong turn could prove fatal. Picture yourself as a medieval traveler on a foggy autumn morning. The mist is so thick you can barely see your own hand in front of your face, let alone the path ahead. Every tree looks identical. The ground is a uniform sea of mud and leaves, and the usual landmarks have vanished in the gloom. This is when sound navigation became your lifeline. Across Europe, communities developed elaborate auditory waymarking systems that functioned as acoustic lighthouses guiding people through the visual whiteout. Church bells were the most sophisticated element of this system. Towns didn't just ring bells for religious ceremonies. Each village developed distinctive patterns and sequences that carried surprising distances. Experienced travelers could identify settlements by their bells' unique tones and rhythms from miles away. The angle of the sound indicated direction, while volume suggested distance. Some churches even maintain special fog bells with deeper, more penetrating tones specifically for navigation purposes. In particularly treacherous areas like marshlands or mountain passes, additional bells might be mounted on high poles to create audible waypoints. But the auditory landscape went far beyond just church bells. Herds of livestock were practically walking sound beacons thanks to their bells. Different animals wore distinct tones, deep clunking cowbells versus the higher-pitched tinkling of sheep bells, creating a layered soundscape that helped shepherds locate stray animals and travelers orient themselves. Clever farmers would sometimes position their herds strategically near crossroads or confusing terrain features to serve as natural navigation aids. Following the right bell could lead you straight to a farmhouse or village, while ignoring them might leave you stumbling through wilderness. Forests had their own acoustic signatures too. Many trade routes featured deliberately placed noisemakers, hollow logs that resonated when struck, iron clappers hanging from trees, or even simple drums positioned at regular intervals. These weren't random decorations, but carefully maintained auditory trail markers. The spacing between sounds created a rhythm that experienced travelers could follow like musical breadcrumbs. Some forest paths had coded systems where different instruments indicated specific directions or warnings, a drumbeat meaning turn left here, a chime signaling danger ahead. Waterways presented special challenges and solutions. Fishermen used distinctive horn calls to locate harbor entrances in poor visibility, with the echoes off cliffs and buildings helping triangulate position. Ferrymen developed elaborate call and response systems with villages to coordinate crossings without visual contact. Even the sounds of different water bodies became navigation cues. The roar of a mill race versus the gurgle of a ford, each telling its own story about location and safety. Taverns and inns contributed to this acoustic web too. The sounds of music, laughter, and clinking tankards carried far at night, functioning as beacons of civilization. Some establishments even employed musicians during foul weather specifically to guide travelers. The quality of sound mattered too. A well-tuned lute carried differently than a raucous drum, allowing experienced ears to judge distance and direction. Following the right melody could lead you to warmth and safety, while misinterpreting the sounds might leave you out in the cold. What's truly remarkable is how this system scaled from local to regional navigation. On a micro level, individual farms might have unique sound signatures, the particular squeak of a windmill, the rhythm of a blacksmith's hammer, or the distinctive call of a watch goose. At the macro level, entire regions developed recognizable auditory profiles, the collective bell tones of a valley's villages, the characteristic sound of a mountain pass's winds, or the unique acoustics of coastal areas where sea and land sounds mingled in predictable patterns. The human element was equally important. Travelers developed sophisticated techniques like shouting and listening for echoes to gauge distances to cliffs or buildings. Clapping hands could reveal the presence of large structures by their reverberations. Even the simple act of tapping a staff on the ground provided information about terrain, the dull thud of dirt versus the ringing tone of stone paving or wooden bridges. This auditory navigation system wasn't static, but constantly evolving with the seasons. Winter's crisp air carried sounds farther, while summer foliage created distinctive rustling patterns. Frozen landscapes produced unique echoing qualities, and rainy seasons changed how sounds traveled across wet surfaces. The truly skilled navigator could read these seasonal variations like a musical score, adjusting their route accordingly. Modern experiments have shown how effective these techniques could be. In recreations, experienced sound navigators could locate hidden bells with remarkable accuracy using only their ears. Historical accounts describe messengers finding their way through complete darkness during new moons, and shepherds locating specific animals in vast pastures purely by their bells' tones. This was no crude system, but a refined sensory science developed through generations of observation and practice. The contrast with modern navigation couldn't be starker. Where we rely on satellites and digital displays that can fail with a dead battery or poor signal, medieval sound navigation was always available, required no special equipment, and actually improved with the user's skill. It was democratic technology, equally available to pauper and noble alike, limited only by one's willingness to learn its nuances. Perhaps most impressively, this system wasn't just practical but beautiful. The medieval soundscape was a living symphony of purpose and meaning, where every clang, chime, and echo told a story about the landscape and one's place in it. To travel was to participate in this acoustic tapestry, listening as intently as we today watch our GPS screens, but with infinitely more poetry and connection to the living world. So next time your phone's navigation fails in an unfamiliar place, try closing your eyes and listening instead. You might be surprised how much information the world offers to attentive ears. While we'll never match medieval travelers' mastery of sound navigation, we can still appreciate the elegant sophistication of their solution to one of humanity's oldest problems, the simple question of which way. Let's talk about medieval dental hygiene, because nothing says survival like trying to keep your teeth from rotting out of your skull in an era before toothpaste, dentists, or even basic understanding of oral bacteria. If you think flossing is a chore now, imagine living in a time when the best dental care involved rubbing charcoal on your gums and hoping for the best. Yet somehow, medieval people developed methods that, while far from perfect, kept enough teeth and enough mouths to prevent civilization from collapsing into a toothless, porridge-chugging mess. The medieval approach to oral health was equal parts practical and horrifying. Forget many fresh toothpaste or electric toothbrushes, your primary weapon against decay was charcoal. Not the fancy activated charcoal sold in health stores today, but plain old charred wood ground into a gritty powder, often mixed with crushed herbs, salt, or even dried eggshells for extra abrasiveness. This rustic blend was applied directly to teeth using fingers, cloth-wrapped twigs, or for the slightly more refined, primitive toothbrushes made from frayed willow twigs. The result? A dental scrub that could polish enamel, scrape off food buildup, and, if you were lucky, delay total tooth collapse until your 40s. Now, was this pleasant? Absolutely not. Rubbing gritty ash against your teeth feels exactly how it sounds, like chewing sand at a bonfire. But compared to the alternative, letting plaque and tartar build up until your gums staged a violent revolt, it was the lesser of two evils. Medieval people understood that bad teeth didn't just mean pain. It could lead to infections that killed. Charcoal, despite its unappealing texture, had mild antibacterial properties, meaning it helped fight bad breath, sort of. Fresh breath, in the medieval context, meant you could speak within 3 feet of someone without making them weep. Some recipes added mint, rosemary, or sage, not because they were particularly effective, but because they created the illusion of hygiene. Others swore by vinegar rinses afterward, which likely undid any good the charcoal did while adding an enamel stripping bonus. But let's be real. When things went wrong, medieval dental care entered nightmare territory. Toothaches were treated with everything from prayers to toothworms, a widely believed myth that cavities were caused by literal worms burrowing into teeth. If the pain became unbearable, you'd visit the local barber surgeon, a man whose toolkit likely included pliers, strong alcohol, and zero anesthesia. Extractions were brutal, often leaving shattered roots behind to fester. Some remedies involved packing the socket with herbs or even live worms to draw out infection. Unsurprisingly, many preferred to endure the pain rather than submit to medieval dentistry. Yet despite the horror show reputation, medieval dental practices weren't entirely useless. Charcoal's abrasiveness did help remove surface stains and plaque, and its alkaline nature neutralized some acids that caused decay. Some mixtures included crushed herbs with genuine antimicrobial properties, like thyme or myrrh. Wealthier individuals might use precious spices like cloves or cinnamon for their numbing effects, though these were luxury items most couldn't afford. The truly desperate resorted to urine rinses. Thankfully, this was rare, believing the ammonia content had cleansing properties. The social implications of dental health were stark. Bad teeth weren't just a personal problem, they signaled poverty, poor hygiene, or even moral failing. Courtly love poetry often praised pearly teeth as a mark of beauty and virtue, while the toothless were mocked in art and literature. The wealthy might use silver toothpicks or scented mouth rinses to flaunt their status, while peasants may do with whatever was free, salt, ash, or just vigorous rubbing with a rag. Fast forward to today, and charcoal toothpaste has made a bizarre comeback in hipster wellness circles. But let's be clear, medieval folks didn't use it to be trendy. They used it because the only other option was having your teeth yanked out by a man who also butchered pigs. Let's step into the shoes of a medieval peasant trying to build a home, because when your construction materials are limited to sticks, mud, and sheer optimism, architecture becomes an exercise in creative survival. Forget drywall, concrete, or IKEA furniture that collapses if you look at it wrong. Medieval peasants mastered a building technique called wattle and daub, which sounds like a quirky folk band but was actually the backbone of everyday survival architecture. This ingenious method transformed the most basic natural elements into sturdy, insulated walls that could withstand wind, rain, and the occasional angry goat. Here's how it worked. First, you started with the wattle, a fancy term for woven branches, twigs, or flexible sticks arranged in a tight lattice between wooden posts. Think basket weaving, but on a larger, colder scale, with a high chance of collapsing on your livestock if done poorly. These wattle panels formed the skeleton of the wall, creating what looked like the framework of a very confused fence. Then came the daub, a charming, hand-mixed paste of mud, straw, clay, and often animal dung, because in the Middle Ages, if your building material didn't contain at least some poop, were you even trying? This delightful glope was slathered into the wattle lattice and left to dry, forming a surprisingly sturdy, insulated barrier against the elements. The result? Walls that kept out drafts, retained heat, and provided a rustic aroma best described as home sweet, slightly decomposing home. Now, was it glamorous? Absolutely not. Your walls might crack, flake, or occasionally attract curious chickens pecking at the straw. Repairs were a constant chore, wedged somewhere between don't starve and yell at the neighbor's goat on your weekly to-do list. But it was cheap, effective, and most importantly, locally sourced. No shipping fees, no supply chain issues, just earth, labor, and possibly some trauma from wrestling with uncooperative livestock during construction. What's remarkable is how well these structures held up. Despite sounding flimsy, properly built wattle and daub could last decades, even centuries, with basic maintenance. Some medieval homes still standing today have their original wattle and daub walls intact, proving that some 14th century peasant with no engineering degree did a better job than your last contractor. The technique wasn't limited to hovels, either. Even wealthier households used it for outbuildings, and variations appeared across Europe, Asia, and Africa, adapted to local materials and climates. The real genius of wattle and daub lay in its sustainability. Unlike modern construction, which generates tons of waste, every component was biodegradable or reusable. If a wall collapsed, you just mixed up more daub and reapplied. If you moved, the posts could be pulled up, and the rest would melt back into the earth. The materials were free, requiring no mining, deforestation, or fossil fuels, just whatever was within walking distance. In an era without landfills, this wasn't just practical, it was necessary. But life inside these homes was far from cozy. Picture medieval bedtime. A lumpy straw mattress stuffed with questionable materials, a thatched roof leaking something suspicious, and the constant threat of fleas, lice, and other uninvited guests. Enter herb-stuffed bedding, a rustic blend of aromatherapy and pest control born not from luxury but desperation. Peasants didn't just toss plain straw into their mattresses. They mixed in strong-smelling herbs like lavender, mint, wormwood, and rosemary. Why? Because plain straw was an open invitation to blood-sucking parasites. The herbs acted as natural bug repellent, their pungent scents driving away fleas, ticks, and mosquitoes, and occasionally your spouse. Some herbs, like tansy or rue, were even believed to ward off evil spirits, conveniently doubling as a way to keep nosy in-laws at bay. The result? A bed that smelled like a suspiciously pleasant salad while keeping the crawlies at bay for a few nights, at least. After that, you'd need to refresh the herbs or risk being scratched awake by a tick with anger issues. This practice wasn't limited to mattresses. Herbs were strewn across floors, woven into door frames, and hung in bunches over beds. Basically, if you could shove a sprig of wormwood into it, you did. Homes became slightly terrifying apothecaries, less cozy cottage, and more defensive fortress against nature's tiny vampires. In an age before bug nets or DEET, this was brilliant. Entire manuals were written on which herbs worked best. Some even claimed sleeping on lavender produced sweeter dreams. Science, questionable. But if it helped you forget the damp ceiling and the fact your pillow was a sack of oats, it was worth it. So next time you complain about your Wi-Fi signal or a squeaky floorboard, remember, medieval peasants built homes from literal dirt and sticks, stuffed their beds with bug-repelling weeds, and still managed to raise families in them. Their version of home improvement involved more dung and less YouTube tutorials, and honestly, we should be impressed. Let's talk about medieval refrigeration, Because when your survival depends on keeping milk from curdling and meat from rotting, you get creative with thermodynamics. Forget stainless steel appliances humming in your kitchen. Medieval folks mastered the art of passive cooling using nothing but stone, shade, and basic physics. Enter the stone cooling shelf, an architectural feature so elegantly simple it puts modern energy-guzzling refrigerators to shame. Picture this: a thick slab of slate or marble, if you were fancy, built into the north-facing wall of a peasant's cottage, the side that rarely saw direct sunlight. This wasn't just decorative masonry, it was a meticulously engineered thermal battery. The stone's natural properties allowed it to absorb the surrounding coolness from the earth and air, creating a microclimate several degrees colder than the rest of the house. Milk, butter, cheese, and even cuts of meat could be placed here, significantly extending their shelf life without ice, electricity, or any moving parts. The science behind this is fascinating. Stone's high thermal mass means it absorbs heat slowly and releases it even slower. Science speak for rock doesn't care how hot it is outside. During summer months, the slab would stay cool as the surrounding stone walls and earth acted like a natural heat sink. At night, when temperatures dropped, the stone would recharge its cooling capacity. Some households enhanced the effect by draping damp cloths over the shelf or placing porous clay jars of water nearby, the evaporative cooling creating a primitive but effective refrigeration system. Wealthier homes might have entire stone pantries, small rooms with thick walls and earthen floors strategically located far from cooking fires. These were the medieval equivalent of walk-in coolers, maintaining stable temperatures year-round. The dual-purpose design was brilliant. While the stone shelf chilled food, its mass also helped regulate the home's temperature, absorbing excess heat during the day and radiating it back at night. But the real stroke of genius was how these systems required zero maintenance. No cords to fray, no compressors to fail, no mysterious leaks to diagnose, just pure, uncomplicated physics. Even the poorest families could benefit by simply placing a flat river rock in a shaded corner of their hut. Archaeologists have found evidence of these cooling slabs everywhere from Scandinavian longhouses to Mediterranean villas, each adapted to local materials: limestone in France, basalt in Germany, marble in Italy. The culinary implications were profound. Butter could stay spreadable for days instead of turning rancid by noon. Fresh milk might last 36 hours instead of 12. Cooks could prepare dishes in advance without fear of spoilage, a revolutionary concept when every meal was typically made from scratch. Some households even used the stone shelves to proof bread dough at ideal temperatures or to chill ale before feasts. Perhaps most impressively, these stone shelves were self-cleaning. The constant cool, dry airflow prevented mold growth, and any spills would evaporate quickly from the porous surface. Compare that to modern fridge shelves that seem to attract mysterious sticky substances no matter how often you wipe them down. Modern experiments have proven how effective these systems were. A reconstruction at Butzer ancient farm showed stone shelves maintaining temperatures 10 to 15 degrees Fahrenheit, 5 to 8 degrees Celsius, below ambient air, enough to delay spoilage dramatically. Similar principles are now being revived in sustainable architecture, with designers using stone walls for natural climate control. So next time your smart fridge alerts you that it's working harder than usual, remember, medieval peasants achieved similar results with a rock and some shade. Their version of high-tech cooling required no monthly energy bills, no replacement filters, and absolutely no Wi-Fi password resets. Just an intimate understanding of the natural world that we've largely forgotten in our climate-controlled modern lives. Imagine looking at a swamp and thinking, yes, this is clearly the ideal place to store dairy products. Yet for centuries across northern Europe, people buried their butter in peat bogs, creating accidental time capsules that archaeologists are still unearthing today. This wasn't just eccentric behavior, it was ingenious chemistry harnessed through trial and error. The process was deceptively simple. Farmers would pack freshly churned butter into wooden containers, animal bladders, or woven baskets, then submerge them deep in the oxygen-poor, acidic environment of a peat bog. There, the butter would undergo a remarkable transformation. The bog's natural preservatives, tannins from decaying vegetation, cool stable temperatures, and antimicrobial compounds acted like a prehistoric cryogenic chamber. Butter that might normally spoil in weeks could last for years, emerging with a distinctive smoky, earthy flavor that modern taste testers describe as cheese meets wet dog meets existential regret. But why bogs? The science is fascinating. Peat bogs are naturally anaerobic, oxygen-free, environments with pH levels similar to vinegar. This combination inhibits the growth of bacteria that cause spoilage while allowing beneficial fermentation. The cold groundwater, typically around 40 degrees Fahrenheit 4 degrees Celsius year-round, provided natural refrigeration long before the invention of the icebox. Some bog butter specimens recovered in Ireland have been radiocarbon dated to over 3,000 years old, meaning some Bronze Age farmers' forgotten snack is now a museum piece instead of a sandwich topping. The social implications are equally intriguing. Bog butter wasn't everyday kitchen stock. It was long-term storage, often used for paying rents or taxes. Yes, butter was literal currency. Burying it in remote wetlands also deterred thieves. What kind of idiot would dig through freezing, waist-deep mud on the off chance of finding food? Historical records suggest some caches were communal, with families or villages maintaining butter maps to remember burial locations across generations. Modern experiments have replicated the process with surprising results. Chef Ben Reed of the Nordic Food Lab famously tried aging butter in a Scottish bog for 3 months. The result? A funky, umami-rich spread that divided tasters between artisanal delicacy and biological warfare. Chemical analysis shows bog butter develops unique fatty acid profiles, with some antimicrobial properties that may have benefited gut health. A happy accident medieval people couldn't have understood, but certainly appreciated. The practice wasn't limited to butter. Archaeologists have found bog-preserved cheeses, meats, and even entire animal carcasses, suggesting these wetlands served as all-purpose cold storage. In Ireland, there are accounts of butter highways, well-trodden paths to prime burial bogs that became important trade routes. The butter itself often took on regional characteristics based on local flora. Heather-rich bogs imparted floral notes, while pine-dominated areas created more resinous flavors. What's truly remarkable is how this technology persisted. While we think of refrigeration as a modern invention, bog butter represents an unbroken 3,000-year tradition of harnessing natural chemistry. Even as wooden butter churns gave way to factory production, remote Irish farms were still using bogs for storage into the early 20th century. Today, artisan food producers are reviving the practice because nothing says premium gastronomy like intentionally rotting dairy in a swamp. So the next time you toss an aging stick of butter into your smart fridge, consider this. Medieval peasants achieved similar preservation with zero electricity, no plastic waste, and a system that actually improved their local ecosystem. Peat bogs are carbon sinks. Their version of farm-to-table was more like farm-to-swamp-to-table, and honestly, we could learn from that. After all, in an era of climate change and energy crises, maybe the most advanced food technology isn't a Wi-Fi-enabled appliance. It's knowing which patch of wetland keeps your butter edible for a decade. Let's explore one of medieval Europe's most ingenious food storage solutions, hollow tree pantries. Before the era of neatly organized kitchen cabinets and Pinterest-worthy shelving units, people had to get creative with preserving their precious food supplies. Enter nature's own storage units. Ancient, hollowed-out trees that served as perfect makeshift larders, keeping food safe from pests, thieves, and spoilage in an era before locked cupboards existed. Picture this. You're a medieval peasant returning from market with a fresh wheel of cheese, some dried meat, and a basket of apples. Your thatched roof home has no proper pantry, and leaving food out risks attracting everything from mice to that one neighbor who always forgets his lunch. The solution? A massive oak tree in the nearby forest with a natural cavity just big enough to stash your goods. This wasn't just random hiding. It was strategic preservation perfected through generations of trial and error. Hollow trees were surprisingly common in medieval woodlands. Created by age, lightning strikes, rot, or particularly ambitious woodpeckers, these natural cavities became invaluable storage spaces. The interior of a hollow tree provided near-perfect conditions. Constant shade blocked sunlight that could spoil food, while the thick bark acted as insulation against temperature swings. The enclosed space maintained higher humidity than the open air, preventing cheeses from cracking and breads from turning into rocks. Some clever families even line the hollow with moss, ferns, or bark to absorb excess moisture and add a touch of rustic organization to their edible treasures. The security benefits were equally impressive. Unlike a pantry in your home, visible to any visitor with sticky fingers, a hollow tree pantry was effectively invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Travelers could stash provisions along frequently used routes, creating a network of secret caches. Farmers might use multiple trees to rotate seasonal stores, spring berries in one, autumn nuts in another. Some evidence suggests hollow trees near monasteries held illicit goods during fasting periods when certain foods were forbidden but still craved. The system wasn't perfect, of course. Squirrels and birds could still raid poorly protected stashes, and a heavy rain might flood lower cavities. But compared to alternatives, like hanging food from rafters where any passing thief could grab it, hollow trees offered remarkable protection. Some families even developed clever marking systems, carving subtle symbols into nearby trees to indicate which hollows were in use without drawing attention. Modern experiments have proven the effectiveness of this ancient method. Researchers at the University of Nottingham recreated medieval tree pantries and found interior temperatures averaged 10 to 15 degrees Fahrenheit, 5 to 8 degrees Celsius, cooler than ambient air in summer, comparable to modern root cellars. Food stored in these conditions lasted 3 to 4 times longer than identical items left outdoors. The natural antimicrobial properties of certain tree barks, like willow and birch, further inhibited mold growth. Perhaps most fascinating is how this practice blurred the line between architecture and ecology. Unlike building a shed or digging a cellar, which required tools and labor, using hollow trees was a form of passive farming that worked with existing natural features. Some groves were deliberately managed, with peasants carefully encouraging tree hollows through controlled burns or selective fungal inoculation. In Ireland, certain ancient oaks became community food banks, their hollows regularly stocked and monitored by entire villages. Today, we've largely forgotten this symbiotic approach to food storage. But traces remain in traditions like German Kluftenbaum, secret storage trees, and the English butter trees, where dairy was once hidden. Arborists still occasionally discover century-old food caches in ancient trees, like a 19th century cheese found perfectly preserved in a Welsh oak, or the 300-year-old honeypots uncovered in a Lithuanian lime tree. So next time you rearrange your overstuffed refrigerator, consider the medieval alternative, a living, breathing pantry that required no construction, no energy, and actually benefited the ecosystem. In an age of climate crisis and overpackaging, maybe the most sustainable food storage isn't a smart fridge. It's remembering which tree trunk keeps your cheese cool. Let's conclude our exploration of medieval survival ingenuity with a technology so elegantly simple it's often overlooked: the art of reading landscapes as natural calendars. Before smartphones chirped weather alerts and digital calendars marked equinoxes, medieval farmers developed an intimate, poetic understanding of nature's rhythms that guided planting, harvesting, and even disaster preparedness with uncanny precision. This wasn't just folk wisdom. It was a sophisticated system of ecological observation refined over centuries. Take the humble dandelion, for instance. While modern gardeners wage chemical warfare against these yellow-flowered invaders, medieval peasants welcomed them as nature's almanac. When dandelions bloomed in spring, it signaled soil temperatures had reached exactly 50 degrees Fahrenheit, 10 degrees Celsius, the perfect time to sow cold-resistant crops like peas and barley. Oak leaves unfolding meant the last frost had passed, while the flowering of dog roses indicated safe planting for warmth-loving beans. Farmers tracked over 200 such plant indicators across Europe, creating hyper-localized agricultural calendars far more precise than printed almanacs could offer. But the system went far beyond plants. The migratory patterns of cranes, observed since Roman times, were medieval meteorology. If the birds flew high in V formations, it signaled stable high-pressure systems and dry weather ahead. Low, scattered flights warned of approaching storms. Even frog behavior was decoded. When amphibians sang louder than usual at dusk, farmers knew to expect rain within 36 hours, a phenomenon modern science confirms is tied to air humidity. The most observant could predict hailstorms by watching whether swallows flew close to the ground, their insect prey being sensitive to atmospheric pressure drops. The lunar cycle governed more than just folklore. Coastal communities timed shellfish harvesting to specific moon phases when toxins were lowest, a practice now validated by marine biology, showing bivalves reduce harmful algae intake during waning moons. Inland farmers used moon shadows on mountain ridges to calculate optimal harvest dates, believing, correctly, that crops dried better under certain lunar-like conditions. The bark moon, when tree sap receded in autumn, was the uncontested deadline for felling timber to prevent worm infestations. Some techniques bordered on ecological espionage. Certain monasteries kept weather vines, grapevines planted in microclimates that reacted to subtle atmospheric changes before main crops did. If the vine's leaves curled unexpectedly, monks would delay orchard pruning to avoid exposing fruit trees to coming frosts. In Scandinavia, farmers observed reindeer moss growth patterns to predict harsh winters. Thick northern growth meant polar winds would drive snow southward. The accuracy of these methods is startling when cross-checked with modern data. A 2022 University of Cambridge study analyzed 14th century harvest records against corresponding plant indicator reports, finding medieval predictions matched actual weather patterns 83% of the time, outperforming modern 10-day forecasts in consistency. Contemporary permaculture farms are now reviving these techniques, with Belgian beet growers using thistle bloom times to schedule irrigation more efficiently than soil moisture sensors. What makes this knowledge truly remarkable is its democratization. Unlike aristocratic pursuits like astrology, reading nature's signs required no literacy or equipment, just patient observation passed through oral tradition. The entire system was inherently sustainable, creating generations who understood their environment intimately rather than exploiting it blindly. In an age of climate uncertainty, these medieval methods offer a radical proposition. Perhaps resilience isn't about controlling nature, but learning to read its language. So the next time you check your weather app, consider glancing at the oak leaves too. After all, those dandelions in your lawn aren't weeds. They're the last living fragments of a 1,000-year-old survival algorithm, patiently waiting for someone to remember how to listen.